Welcome to another segment of the Politics Wrap. Now, moving on to the story, the deadline for public submissions on electoral reforms has passed. The Electoral Reform Panel will now embark on a public participation process with various sectors and South Africans at large. The public, organizations, civil society groups, political parties, and prospective independent candidates made their written submissions for consideration on the proposal for an electoral system for the National Assembly and all 9 provincial legislatures. Submissions addressed why, how, and whether the current South African electoral system should be reformed, changed, or even replaced. To talk to us more about this matter, we are joined by Build One South Africa's Deputy President, Nobuntu Hlazo Webster, as well as Tessa, who is the Director of the Rivonia Circle, a think tank organization. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us on the Politics Wrap this evening.
Thank you for having us, Natasha.
Yeah.
Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. No, I'll just start off with you before I go to Tessa. I know that I personally covered Bosa's submissions to the Electoral Panel, and I think just talk to us on your submissions first and foremost.
I think before I even get into the submissions, Natasha, I think it's important to note that this is actually a way overdue process. We know that when we went into democracy in 1994, the current electoral system was supposed to be one which was temporary, so to speak. And so we've had various processes that have happened, the Van Zyl-Slabbert reports, we've gone through the Mklanke panel, and then more recently, the Ministerial Advisory Committee, and all have pretty much come back with the same kind of recommendations. And so this is something that's way overdue. And what we're saying really is that while there's this process that's happening now, there's a public participation process, what will matter in the end is actually political will to be able to change the system. So what our submission is one, to say that we advocate for a multi-member constituency system. And really what that means is that ultimately, what's important to us is that South Africans are able to directly elect their representatives, and that those representatives actually represent specific constituencies. The second on our side is the direct election of a president. And then the third is coalition agreements that are more binding than what we have now. So ultimately, in a nutshell and to summarize, that's what we're submitting. But most important is to be able to say, while these processes are happening and while we're also participating in the processes, what we need is political will, particularly in Parliament. And we know that that's difficult because people don't want to let go of a system that actually benefits them in the way that it does with the majority parties and the bigger parties in this country.
And we'll get to that issue of political will shortly. Tessa, you've heard what Nobuntu had to say, but I think first and foremost, how important is this process? And do you actually get the sense that South Africans are educated or actually know about this process at all?
Well, no. One of the things that's been very concerning about this process, even when we had the first round of this, so 2020 judgment comes out from the New Nation movement. The Constitutional Court says that our electoral system as it is right now is unconstitutional because it does not allow people to be directly elected if they're not in political parties. And Parliament was then seized with coming up with a new electoral system. Just the idea that in the 2024 elections, we were dealing with a new electoral law and a new electoral system, but that was not widespread information in society. It was not headline news. It was not buzzing in every community, is an indictment, because how many things in a democracy are more important than how we vote and that our electoral process and system changed? Eventually, it got watered down to the question about 3 ballots to make sure that people understood what they would be seeing in the ballot book. But this is a much bigger issue. It's about what our vote means. It's about the power of our vote. And more importantly, what we are able to do once we have elected people, who we elect, what our access to those people is, and what our accountability measures are. That's what an electoral system allows us to do. And Parliament has been really, really bad about making sure that people understand the enormity of the changes ahead of us. I mean, civil society organizations really did try and make a lot of noise about it and put some pressure on Parliament. But we realized that, much like Nobuntu just said, that the parliamentarians didn't have an incentive to change the system or to let people know there was an opportunity to change the system, because of course this is the political culture and environment that has gotten them elected. But really, if this is the parliament of the people for the people, it must be us that decide how we elect people and give them a mandate as our parliamentarians to change accordingly.
And they always say that the third time is a charm. Nobuntu cites it very correctly. You've had all these commissions before this current electoral panel. You've had the fund sale, the Ministerial Advisory Committee. What needs to be done to make sure that, this commission actually, or the results of this commission actually gets to be implemented?
Well, I think there are a number of different things that we need to do as voters and citizens and civil society. The first thing is that we must explain the implications of these changes. One of the things we've seen over the last 30 years is that we've gone to having more and more political parties. And as we've analyzed this at the Rivonia Circle over the last few years, we have found that the proliferation of political parties, we have up to 500 that are registered and about 70 that participated in the last election, that is not just about people thinking in a local community or in a small grouping that they can create the next president of the country. But in fact, what people are saying is they want to elect people that they know. And the reason they want to elect people that they know is they want more access to accountability. They want to be able to go to somebody once they are elected and make sure that their vote counts for something. And if those people do not do what they said they were going to do before they were elected, that there's something that we can do about this. In other parts of the world, and we must realize our electoral system is actually quite unique in that we vote for parties only. Most electoral systems in the world are either mixed, where you can vote for parties and individuals, or you're only voting for individuals. Our constitution does not urge us to vote only for individuals because it wants us to have a mix of people. And it wants us to have a diversity of people in parliament. But the proportionality cannot be more important than accountability. And so we must understand that this process is about how do we get the most effective and most accountable outcomes when it comes to the election. And more importantly, can we actually fire the people that we hire through the ballot? Because again, right now, political parties have a lot of power to fire the people that go into parliament, even the president. We've seen in our democratic dispensation, a political party has, without the will of the people, been able to fire 2 presidents, recall 2 presidents and get them to step down without even going to parliament for impeachment. And us as the citizens, when we even see a councillor that isn't doing their job, we have no ability to recall them. That's what's at stake with this process.
But let me just go back to you. I mean, these electoral reforms are actually meant to level the playing field between political parties and independent candidates, right? And, you find that the current situation, the current electoral system that we have, political parties have the upper hand, right? As Bosa in Parliament, who do you think is actually going to represent the rights of independent candidates?
So I think it's more than just about the rights of independent candidates. And when you look at the electoral reform as a whole, it really is more about transparency, it's about accountability, it's about responsiveness. That's really what it's about. So I always want to speak about it beyond and broader than independent candidates, because ultimately people think that the fight is for independent candidates. No, the fight is for South Africans to be able to choose people, as Tessa is saying, that will be directly accountable to them. And so in terms of who will actually fight that in Parliament, it's very important for parties like us who believe in this kind of transparency and this kind of accountability to really strongly lobby this in Parliament and make sure that we're getting others on board who are willing to actually fight the same fight and to actually bring parties to a realization that ultimately one of the biggest issues that we have is that the responsiveness of MPs and of politicians currently is to their parties. The agendas that they are actually playing to their parties. But if you are a party and if you have representatives that are ultimately responsive and responding to the people, that is something ultimately that will benefit you. More and more we saw in the last elections that the non-responsiveness does not pay. We saw the reduction in the votes that the ANC had, and the non-responsiveness does not pay. And so this is a way to actually be connected with people and to know know what they want and what they need. And that is something that can ultimately, if you are a party, if you have contested in this kind of system, this is ultimately something that can benefit you as a party in making you better connected to your people and better understanding what it is that the constituencies that you represent need.
How will you keep the momentum going as BOSA as a political party?
So we are constantly engaged with various constituencies. We constantly engage with citizens. We've been, I mean, if you remember, Build One SA was born out of a movement called One SA. And so we've been at this now for about 4 or 5 years, from before we were actually even able to establish a political party. And so we've kept the momentum going because we've continued to fight this fight and we've continued to engage South Africans. Even when we established Build One SA, our model is not like a typical political party model. What we do is we've asked South Africans to say, who do you want to see representing you in parliament and legislature? Come 2026, it will be the same. And throughout that process, we're encouraging South Africans to think of politics in a different way, to think of representation in a different way, even through our own model, to say you can actually choose who represents you, and ultimately you can withdraw them if they're not delivering. So we continue to engage citizens, not only just through our various platforms, but even in how we actually do politics as a political party.
Let me just take this conversation to Tessa as we wrap up. Tessa, as Rivonia Circle, have you made any submissions to the Electoral Panel? And please just tell us what they actually are.
Yeah, so we have made submissions as the Rivonia Circle, and ours hinge on a few things. One is this question about a mixed system, a system that maintains some level of proportional representation where we vote for parties, so that we still continue to have a wide variety of people being able to be represented in Parliament, but also that has some isolated seats or ring-fenced seats within the National Assembly and provincial assemblies for direct voting, which we don't think is inconsistent with the Constitution or even political norms when you think about the fact that that's the way that we vote at local government level. Your ward councillor is actually a direct vote for an individual. It is not for a party, even though parties play on that. And so we believe that that's consistent with both the Constitution and the political norms that we have right now. But it gives us the opportunity to have that direct accountability. And then the second thing is there's a question that's arisen around thresholds and saying that there should be a minimum threshold for being able to get into Parliament or be able to get into legislatures of around 1%. And we're challenging that figure in terms of what its rationale is. Because if you applied that figure right now, you would go from, Parliament would go from having 18 parties represented to about 7. And you might say, well, that's a really good thing. But if you think about, again, what we're trying to solve for, we're trying to solve for accountability and people feeling like they know who they're voting for. And I would say that I think that we would have different kinds of results, even in the electoral process, even if we just had constituencies, because people do want that closer representation to where they are. But we don't think that thresholds are the way to do that. I think threshold will just give more power to very few parties. And right now, what has happened is that it's given where we are right now and having an expanded array of parties does give more opportunities for contestation, especially in an era of coalition politics where we're going to have groups of parties that are going to be in government. We are going to have to have a stronger representation in the opposition benches.
Unfortunately, on that note, we'll have to wrap up. But ladies, thank you so much for your time. I wish you actually had more time for this conversation, but of course, there's always the next time. Of course, that was Tessa Dooms from the Rivonia Circle and Nobuntu Hlazo Webster, who is the Deputy President of Build One South Africa. That's all I have today.